The road was nothing but a vein of cracked earth and gray grit. Daniel stood at the edge of it, his heels sinking into the parched ground. A sleek black car roared past, moving too fast for the narrow track. It did not stop. It only left behind a violent gust of wind and a thick, choking cloud of dust that settled over his small pile of oranges. Daniel coughed, his chest tightening as he waved a hand to clear the air. He looked down. The fruit was coated in a fine layer of gray powder, the bruises on their skins now highlighted by the dirt. He picked one up, wiped it against his palm, and felt the grit grind into the peel. It was useless. He tossed it back onto the pile. Every morning was a repetition of this same cycle. He walked 3 miles to the market, his empty basket swinging against his hip, while the wealthy hurried toward lives he could not fathom. He kicked a stone into the ditch, watching it vanish into the weeds. "Life is a rigged game," Daniel muttered, his voice flat and hard. "I am destined to rot in this dust." He reached for his rickety wooden crate, his fingers trembling with a quiet, simmering rage. A shadow fell across the crate. Daniel looked up, his eyes narrowing. An old man stood there, leaning heavily on a gnarled wooden cane that had been worn smooth by years of use. He did not look at the oranges. He looked directly at Daniel. "Your face is etched with bitterness," the old man said, his voice raspy like dry leaves skittering over stone. "Why do you carry such heavy anger?" Daniel wiped his brow, his hands leaving streaks of dirt. He did not want a conversation. He wanted a customer. "Because the world gives me nothing," Daniel snapped, his voice rising. The old man did not flinch. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, shriveled seed. He pressed it into Daniel's calloused palm. "Plant this," the old man whispered. "Water it every single day without fail. It will change your life." Daniel let out a harsh, jagged laugh. "A seed? I need gold, not a plant." He looked up to retort, but the old man was already turning away, his silhouette fading. That evening, the air cooled, but the ground remained hard. Daniel walked behind his shack, found a patch of dirt shielded from the road, and knelt. He dug a shallow hole with his bare fingers, the soil dry and gritty against his skin. He dropped the shriveled seed into the dark pocket of earth, covered it, and packed the dirt down until his palms were stained black. He fetched a cup of water from the well and poured it over the spot, watching the liquid vanish instantly into the thirsty ground. He stood up, wiped his hands on his legs, and waited. The next morning, he walked to the spot before the sun had fully risen. The earth was cracked, a web of dry lines marking the surface. He poked the dirt with a stick. Nothing. A week passed. He returned every morning, his eyes scanning for a break in the soil, a sign of life, a reason to keep believing. He found only dust. The wind blew across the patch, scattering loose grit over the site. He stared at the barren ground, his jaw tightening. The silence of the earth felt like a mockery. A month bled into the next, and the ground finally surrendered. A tiny, pale green sliver poked through the cracked surface. It was thin, almost translucent, and it shivered violently at the slightest gust of wind. Daniel stood over it, his shadow looming large. He stared at the pathetic, spindly thing. It was nothing. It was a waste of his time, a cruel joke played by a stranger. His irritation flared, hot and sharp. He reached for the shovel leaning against the shack, his fingers curling around the rough wood handle. He raised the blade, ready to slice through the earth and end the charade once and for all. He took a breath, his muscles coiled to strike. Then, he stopped. The image of the old man surfaced in his mind, not the words, but the eyes. They had been steady, calm, and entirely unbothered. Daniel looked down at the sprout. It was still shivering, yet it remained anchored. He lowered the shovel, the metal head clattering against the dry earth. He carried the water back, his hands steady, and poured a careful, measured stream over the base of the sprout. It felt like a beginning. The rhythm of the well became the rhythm of his life. Every morning, before the heat turned the air into a shimmering haze, Daniel hauled the bucket. The rope bit into his palms, leaving deep, calloused ridges. When the summer sun peaked, the ground baked into a brick-like crust that cracked under his boots. He carried water until his shoulders burned and his breath came in ragged gasps. He did not stop. When the season turned and the nights grew sharp enough to frost the grass, he did not abandon his post. He gathered burlap scraps, weaving them into a protective shield to wrap around the thickening stem. His hands grew rougher, his movements more efficient, stripped of the frantic energy he once possessed. He worked in silence, watching the bark darken. The sprout was no longer a fragile sliver. It was a stubborn, rising force. He spent his days hauling, his nights guarding, and his energy focused entirely on the soil. The years passed in a blur of sweat and frost until the small, pale green thing had become a permanent fixture of his landscape. The change arrived on a morning that felt no different from the thousands that preceded it. Daniel walked to the well, his boots kicking up the familiar gray grit of the road. He looked up to check the branches, expecting the usual pattern of dark, thick leaves. Instead, the light caught a sudden, blinding flash of gold. The tree had erupted. Every branch, once bare and rigid, now sagged under the weight of heavy, vibrant mangoes. They hung in dense, golden clusters, their skins smooth and taut against the harsh glare of the sun. The air, usually thick with the scent of dry earth and stagnant heat, now carried a heavy, sweet perfume that clung to his skin. Daniel dropped his bucket. He stepped into the center of the canopy. The transition was absolute. Outside the perimeter of the branches, the road remained a barren, dusty scar across the land. Beneath the tree, the ground was cool, shaded, and alive with the deep, rich colors of the harvest. He reached out, his fingers brushing the rough bark, then closing around the stem of a fruit. He pulled it free, the snap of the stem echoing in the sudden, heavy silence of the grove. He looked at the fruit, then at the vast, golden canopy above him. The first traveler stopped because of the shade. He pulled his cart off the main road, climbed down, and sat on the cool, packed earth beneath the dense canopy. He looked up at the golden fruit, reached out a coin, and waited. Daniel took the coin. It was heavy, real, and cold against his palm. By noon, the trickle of travelers had become a steady stream. People who once hurried past his shack now slowed their pace, their eyes fixed on the hanging harvest. They didn't see the man who used to beg in the dust. They saw the man who held the keys to the only relief for miles. Then, the rumble of heavy engines broke the rhythm of the road. Two large trucks pulled over, their tires churning up the dirt that Daniel no longer had to breathe. Men in clean shirts stepped out, carrying clipboards and leather bags. They walked directly to the tree, ignoring the road, and spoke to Daniel with a new, sharp respect. They offered contracts, speaking of crates, transport, and weekly quotas. Daniel stood in the center of the grove, his feet planted on the ground he had once cursed. The trucks were loaded until the springs groaned under the weight of the golden fruit. Daniel watched the dust settle behind them, his hands steady, his position on the road completely rewritten. The final truck pulled away, leaving a silence that felt different than the one he had known for years. Daniel remained under the canopy, the scent of crushed leaves and sweet mangoes settling around him. He looked down at his hands. The skin was thick, mapped with deep lines and hardened by years of gripping the handle of a water bucket. He flexed his fingers, feeling the strength in the tendons, the steady control in his grip. These were not the hands of a man who waited for luck. They were the hands of a man who had carved a life out of dry, unyielding earth. He remembered the first day, the way he had cursed the dirt and the heat. He looked at the base of the tree, where the soil was now dark and rich from the water he had carried every single day. The realization hit him with the weight of a physical blow. The seed had not been magic. The magic was the rhythm of the well, the weight of the bucket, and the refusal to walk away when the ground remained empty for months. He had spent years waiting for the world to change, only to find that he had been the one changing all along. A young boy stepped out from the dust of the road, his eyes fixed on the golden fruit hanging just above his reach. He stood at the edge of the shade, hesitant, watching the way the light filtered through the thick, green leaves. He looked at the fruit, then at the man sitting against the trunk. The boy took a step forward, his feet dragging slightly in the grit. He looked up at the massive canopy, his mouth slightly open in wonder. "How did you do it?" the boy asked, his voice thin against the rustle of the branches. "How did you build all of this out of nothing?" Daniel did not answer immediately. He reached up, his fingers steady and sure, and plucked a ripe, heavy mango from the branch. He felt the weight of it, the smooth skin warm from the sun. He leaned forward and held the fruit out. The boy took it, his small hands wrapping around the golden skin. Daniel looked at him, his face steady, the lines of his expression softened by years of quiet labor. He watched the boy trace the curve of the fruit with his thumb. "The ground does not give up its treasures easily," Daniel said. He pointed to the well, then to the dark, rich soil around the base of the tree. "There is no trick to the harvest. There is only the bucket and the well. You must show up every single day, even when the earth stays empty and the sun burns your skin. You must keep pouring the water." Daniel smiled, watching the boy turn and start back toward the road. "Never stop watering your seed," Daniel said. The boy walked away, holding the fruit as if it were something precious.